It was expected to be an ordinary government briefing. The nation tuned in. Schools halted their morning assemblies. Offices activated large screens. Even township roads fell into an unusual hush. President Siril Ramaphosa was scheduled to deliver a live address on national television concerning South Africa's standing within the African Union. Yet, as he stepped into the studio, something felt amiss. Upon the news desk lay a white envelope, unlabeled, sealed with crimson wax. Bearing the official insignia of Burkina Faso, Ramaphosa paused. The camera focused in tightly. "This was handed to me just minutes ago," he said quietly. "From Captain Ibrahim Traoré." A murmur swept through the studio. The president appeared visibly unsettled, yet he cautiously broke the seal. He unfolded the thick parchment slowly, eyes tracing the opening lines. His lips parted faintly. He looked up then, down again. For the first time in many years, South Africans witnessed something uncommon. President Ramaphosa was trembling, and the letter had only just begun. The broadcast fell into a deep silence. Comment sections on live streams erupted. What is in that letter? Did Traore reveal something explosive? Why does Ramaphosa appear so shaken? No one could have predicted what followed. Ramaphosa attempted to read the message aloud. At first, he was unable to. His voice fractured. He cleared his throat and tried once more. "To the honorable leader of South Africa, I write to you not as a president, but as a fellow son of Africa who finds no rest at night." The entire studio remained frozen in place. Traore's words were not diplomatic. They were profoundly human. "I see children starving in Lasso. I see teenagers drowning in the Mediterranean, chasing a Europe that rejects them. I see brothers in Nigeria losing their belief in democracy, and I ask myself, what have we become?" The camera lingered on Ramaphosa's face. His eyes were glassy. One hand gripped the podium tightly. "I possess tanks. I possess firearms. Yet I remain sleepless, knowing a mother in Coca sobs because she cannot feed her own child." Audible gasps rippled through the room. One journalist turned her face away, eyes brimming with tears. This was not calculated diplomacy. This was not public relations maneuvering. This was a cry raw and unfiltered from one leader's soul to another's. Within moments, Traoré's letter was trending across every major global platform. And yet the letter had not even reached its most devastating portion. President Ramaphosa's hands had begun to shake more noticeably. The paper trembled as he reached the central paragraph. Then came the sentence. He read it once, then again. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. The studio held its breath. At last he whispered the words aloud. "If we, the ones with power, sleep peacefully while our people suffer, then we are not. Leaders, we are the final betrayal." Silence gripped the entire room. The president raised his eyes, struggling to maintain composure, but a single tear escaped down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. "What are we building?" The letter asked if the bones of our people paved the path. Traore had written that line, and at that moment, Ramaphosa broke. "Live before the nation." He let the letter fall onto the desk and turned from the camera. His shoulders trembled. He was crying, not as a head of state, but simply as a man. The control room did not interrupt. The feed? They could not. The weight of truth hanging in the studio was too powerful to cut away from. The world was now watching. Africa was now watching. And across the continent, in homes and offices, many began to weep with him. Yet the most heartbreaking portion of the letter, Traoré's deeply personal confession, had not even been read. No one blinked. Neither the journalists seated before him, nor the technicians behind the cameras. Even the president's own advisors stood frozen off stage, overwhelmed by disbelief. What was supposed to be a formal policy address about South Africa's role in the African Union had transformed entirely. Ramaphosa had stopped reading, but the public wanted the letter's full truth. A quiet voice behind the camera asked, "Shall we cut to break?" The producer shook his head. "Are you out of your mind?" The entire world is watching. On social media, live broadcasts surged in viewership. Short clips were already being shared. Across TikTok, what did Traoré say to make President Ramaphosa cry? People were asking. In the control room, a new directive came in. Do not stop the broadcast under any circumstances. Back in the studio, Ramaphosa slowly lifted the letter once more, his voice now slightly steadier. Captain Traore writes, Africa is not broken. She is bruised, and her healing will begin the day her leaders stop whispering and start feeling. Somewhere in Johannesburg, a 14-year-old girl tweeted, Why does this letter sound like something my soul has been waiting to hear? The president folded the letter with care. Then he said something that left the nation in stunned silence. Play the tape. The screen behind him came alive. A moment later, the unmistakable voice of Captain Ibrahim Traoré filled the studio. Pre-recorded, composed, and deliberate, yet saturated with deep emotion. To the people of South Africa, to my brother, President Siril Ramaphosa, he began. I did not write this letter to receive applause. I wrote it because I am exhausted by silence. I am tired of hearing African languages only in refugee camps, but never in boardrooms. I am tired of seeing African genius exported while African children feed from the dirt. The studio remained utterly still, and then Traore continued. This continent continues to bleed from wounds we no longer acknowledge. Hunger plundered resources, and the fear of speaking the truth still haunt us. Yet we do not seek pity. We require courage. And if we, myself, you, Ramaphosa, fail to take meaningful action, then we are no longer deserving of the titles we bear. Another tear slipped from Ramaphosa's eye. This was no longer politics. It was truth cloaked in fearless honesty. This is not a war cry, Traore said as he concluded. It is a wake-up call, and the clock has run out. The screen faded into darkness. Even Twitter seemed to pause. What followed, however, was not simply unexpected. It felt as though destiny itself had come knocking. By dawn, the letter had reached the public. In Cape Town, street vendors had printed excerpts from the speech and were handing them to strangers passing by. In Sutu, a circle of teenage boys huddled around a single phone, replaying Traore's voice again and again. One boy was crying. What kind of leader speaks like this? Another whispered, Why do ours never sound this way? Morning radio programs interrupted their playlists to broadcast the letter in full. Taxi drivers brought their vehicles to a halt to listen. School teachers played it aloud in classrooms. In a clinic in Durban, a nurse streamed the audio for patients waiting in line. And somewhere in Limpopo, an elderly man sitting quietly on a wooden bench looked up and said in a hushed voice, We have not heard words like this since Mandela. Yet the most moving response emerged from the most unlikely place. In Kicha, a mother of 3 posted a video. I have never seen President Ramaphosa cry before, she said. But when he read that letter, I cried with him because, for the first time in a long while, I felt acknowledged. Within 3 hours, her video had crossed 1 million views. However, the people of South Africa were about to discover that Traore's letter had not been sent to Ramaphosa alone. The wave was only beginning to rise. That same evening, a clip from the broadcast found its way to a remote village in Puma, inside a modest house with a leaky tin roof. A 10-year-old girl named Ayanda sat beside her grandmother. The old woman's phone was cracked, but it played. Traore's voice clearly. Ayanda listened carefully, then looked up and asked, Gogo, why is that man crying? Her grandmother hesitated, then replied softly, Because someone finally spoke the truth. Ayanda had no understanding of what the African Union was. She was unfamiliar with terms like sovereignty, but she knew what it meant to be hungry. Understood what it was like to see her mother cry when there was no money left for bread. And when Traore declared, No child should fall asleep with pain in their belly while gold is taken from our land, Ayanda understood every word. The next morning, in her school notebook, she drew a picture of Traore. Below it, she wrote, He remembers us, and she was not alone. Across South Africa, children began drawing, writing, creating, not in response to political rhetoric, but because they had been moved by a rare glimpse of hope. Ibrahim Traoré had never physically stepped into South Africa, but somehow he had entered its soul. Meanwhile, in a government office in Nairobi, Kenya's foreign minister was pacing nervously. The broadcast had gone viral across East Africa as well. People were now marching through city streets holding printed copies of the letter. Universities began to organize open forums to discuss its message. Artists took to the walls painting massive murals of Traore framed with the words, "Let us build a great Africa." In Nairobi, the minister picked up his phone and dialed Traore. "We want to be part of this," he said directly. President Ramaphosa's advisor sounded uncertain. "Part of what exactly?" The Kenyan minister responded without hesitation. "Whatever this is, Africa has waited too long for a moment like this. Do not let it fade away as just another viral moment." Ramaphosa, still emotionally stirred, agreed to convene a video conference. Within the week, 12 African nations joined a private digital summit. It was not public. It was not televised. It all began with a single letter. Traore was formally invited. When he appeared, it was not in his military attire. He wore a simple African. The margins near the end of his life, it read, "One day a young lion shall rise in the west. He will speak not for power, but for the voiceless. The continent must listen to him." Ramaphosa leaned back in his chair, overcome with silence. His eyes turned toward the window. Was Ibrahim Traoré the lion Mandela had foreseen? Before the question could settle, an announcement broke across the continent. Captain Ibrahim Traoré would address Africa Live, not as a soldier, not as a president, but as a servant of the people. The question hung across every border. What would he say next? The world would soon find out, as the date was confirmed. Friday, 8 p.m. West African time, millions prepared. Families gathered around televisions, mobile phones, and makeshift projectors. Even in distant villages, elders brought out old radios, hoping for a signal. The world had heard of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, but they had never heard from him quite like this. The broadcast began with absolute silence. Then slowly, Traore emerged on screen. No military uniform, only a plain African shirt, the sleeves casually rolled to his elbows. His expression was composed yet resolute, illuminated gently by the warm studio lighting. He began to speak in a quiet, steady voice. To every mother who has ever gone to sleep with an empty stomach, to every father who left his home in search of a job that was never there, to every child who believes they must leave Africa in order to be valued, he paused. Across the continent, one could hear the silence. You were never forgotten. You were silenced, and I have come to end that silence. People stared, their mouths slightly open. This was no political address. It was a heartfelt confession from a son of the soil. Even President Ramaphosa, watching from Traore, appeared visibly affected. Then Traore posed a question that would shift the entire conversation. What if the true poverty is not within our wallets, but within our unity? And he had not even reached his second point. Traore looked directly into the camera. I want to share a story I've never spoken about in public. Across the continent, people leaned forward instinctively. When I was 14 years old, I watched my neighbor collapse in the street. His daughter ran to seek help, but there was no doctor, no clinic, only dust and silence. He died in her arms. I still remember the sound of his wife screaming. He closed his eyes briefly, as if reliving the memory. That man was not a soldier. He was not a politician. He was simply African. But no media reported it. No cameras captured it. Why? Because in the eyes of the world, African pain does not go viral. Viewers began to cry. In households, in public taxis, on crowded buses, people wiped tears from their eyes. I made a promise to myself that day, Traore continued. Ever stood before the world, I would not speak about my accomplishments. I would speak about his death, because until his story matters, none of us truly matter. A woman in Nigeria tweeted, I cannot stop crying. He is speaking for every one of us. Then Traore held up the same letter he had once sent to President Ramaphosa. This was never just a letter, he said.
Right.
It is a mirror, and tonight I ask every African to look into it. But he was not finished. What followed would send shockwaves through the very foundation of African politics. Traore leaned in slightly. This is what I believe. If Africa is to rise, we must stop waiting for others to rescue us. No one is coming, and the truth is, no one ever was. He reached beneath the desk and lifted a new document, thick, bound, and officially stamped. This is my proposal. A Pan-African coalition, voluntary, independent, without foreign aid, built by us, for us. Gasps echoed across homes, radio stations, and even within prisons where authorities had allowed inmates to watch. We shall begin modestly. 10 nations, one unified plan, shared resources, shared education, shared defense, no external puppeteers, no intermediaries, only Africans at the table. Across WhatsApp groups, the reaction was electric. Is this really happening? He is doing it? Where do we sign? In Lusaka, a bus conductor pulled over, turned up the volume of the broadcast, and declared, "We are witnessing history." My friends. Back in the studio, Traore made one final vow. I shall not live forever, but if we build this together, Africa will. He lowered his head in solemn silence. The screen went black. Across the continent, people stood, not for applause, but because something within them stirred. It was hope. The following day, a photograph began to circulate rapidly. It showed a classroom in northern Mozambique. Dirt floors, makeshift wooden benches, no roof overhead. Yet at the center of the blackboard, written in chalk, were the words, "Let us build a great Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré." Children sat beneath the blazing sun, notebooks on their laps, their eyes bright with purpose. The teacher, Miss Alina, spoke to a local journalist through a borrowed mobile phone. "We have waited so long for someone to speak to us," she said. Not about handouts, not about charity, but about dignity. Her students had drawn maps of Africa, stripped of all borders. In their place, they had written one people, one dream. That image was shared and reposted millions of times. In Uganda, a university renamed its debate hall the Traore Room. In Ghana, women in open-air markets were recorded chanting, "No more crumbs from the world. We bake our own bread now." But while praise echoed across the continent, quieter forces had begun to stir. Entities alarmed by just how far Traore's message might spread. And in Toria, President Ramaphosa sat alone in his office, his eyes fixed on one particular sentence from the letter. "You do not lead Africans with force. You lead them with feeling." What would be his next move? Then something unexpected occurred. President Ramaphosa's security team was caught completely off guard. A car arrived at the gates of the union buildings, without appointment, without an escort, without any formal clearance. Inside was a young woman from Burkina Faso. She carried only a folder and a sealed letter. The president's assistant burst into his office. "Sir, you must come downstairs. This cannot wait." Ramaphosa descended to the lobby himself. There she stood, poised and composed. Her name was Fatou Traore. She was neither his wife nor his sister. "My father passed away as a humble farmer," she said, "but my brother became his voice." Ibrahim Traoré's younger sister had arrived, not with a demand, but with a dream. "I was asked to deliver this to you in person," she said. The president opened the folder. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters from children, farmers, students, and elders throughout West Africa, marked with smudges of red dust and sweat. One note, in simple block letters, read, "Tell South Africa, we believe in them." Ramaphosa looked at Fatou. "Why now?" he asked. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room like lightning. "Because history does not knock twice, and Africa is knocking now." The president nodded slowly. He understood. But before anything else, he knew he must return to the place where this story first began. Exactly 21 days after receiving the letter. Live on national television, President Cyril Ramaphosa walked once again into the same studio. The same lights, the same cameras, the same desk, but this time he was no longer trembling. The producer leaned forward and whispered, "Mr. President, we are living 321. Ramaphosa looked directly into the camera. His voice was clear, calm, and steady. "3 weeks ago, I opened a letter that broke something inside me, not because it was harsh, but because it was truthful. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not attack me. It reminded me of the promises we have buried. Beneath politics and paperwork, screen behind him lit up with the words, Africa Rising, an invitation to build. Ramaphosa continued, Today I accept his invitation. South Africa will stand as co-leader in the Pan-African Coalition. We shall send not only officials but also teachers, engineers, doctors, people who carry Africa in their hearts and bones. Millions watching across the continent erupted in celebration. In Johannesburg, citizens rushed into the streets. In Ouagadougou, families wept tears of pride and hope. But this was not merely a speech, it was a seed. And what followed grew faster than anyone had anticipated. 3 days after Ramaphosa's second broadcast, something remarkable unfolded. It began in Kigali, then spread to Lagos, then Addis Ababa, then Gaborone. Thousands began marching, not in anger, but in unity. Elderly men in dashikis, women balancing infants on their hips, teenagers waving Pan-African flags high above their heads. They carried signs that read, The letter woke us up. Africa first, Africa forever. We are one people. The movement had no official title, no celebrity endorsements, no corporate sponsorships. It was the people, raw, awakened, united. In Cape Town, someone held up a large photo of Ramaphosa crying. In Bamako, a towering banner displayed Traore's words, If unity is our burden, then division is our curse. And in Sioux, little Iander stood on a wooden box and read aloud from the letter. Around her, grown men and women stood in silence, wiping tears from their eyes. She was only 10 years old, but her voice carried the weight of a continent. The streets had made their declaration. This was no longer politics. This was a reawakening. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat at his desk, watching live broadcasts of the marches flowing across Africa. He turned to his advisor and said quietly, I only wrote one letter. The advisor replied, and it became Africa's voice. 1 month later, 10 African presidents gathered together in person for the first time in years. The location was an open air summit in Accra, Ghana. There were no red carpets, no helicopters, no foreign envoys, only a single long wooden table.